In this video, we're going to learn about Flask routes, variables, and templates. So, topics for this video, we're going to review the CS50 ID, we're going to review Flask, we're going to learn a little bit more about Flask routes and variables, and we'll also learn a little bit more about Flask templates. All right, so quickly again, how to use CS50 ID. CS50 ID can be found at ide.cs50.io. Log in with your GitHub credentials. To create a new file, click on the green circle and new file. And this is where you'll write your Python/HTML code. The red little dot there just indicates that you haven't saved your file just yet. Make sure you save your file before you run it. And to save your file, on a PC it's Control-S, on a Mac it's Command-S. And on the right hand side is where I like to run my terminal. So again, to open up a new terminal, just click on the green circle and select new terminal. To execute a Python file, you would type in Python space and the file name, in this case hello.py, and you would get some output. So the $sign just means that the command is to the right. And again, to run Flask, you would run the command flask run from the directory that you're working from. To download a file, select the file. Fourth option down is going to be download. And happy coding. Okay, quickly review Flask micro framework written in Python. You can check out the official website if you're interested. Flask uses an MVC or model view controller. And a minimal Flask application looks something like this. So in your home directory, the default name of your Flask application would be application.py. And again, to run your Flask application is simply flask run. To see the website that you created, just click on the link, click on open, and that'll open the web page for you. So today we're going to learn about some new topics in Flask, which are routes and variables. So go ahead and create a new directory in your CS50 ID. Go ahead and call it activity 7. So we'll go over to our CS50 ID, and again we'll do make directory activity 7, and we'll go into that directory. We'll do cd make directory 7. All right. Also, you want to create your templates directory. To do that, you could do make directory templates. All right, so on advancedpython.net, go ahead and grab the starter code for your index.html file. So just click on that link there, and in your CS50 ID, go ahead and paste that in there. And then click on File, Save As, call it index.html, and then go into your Activity 7 and then Templates directory and click on Save. And that'll save your file. All right. Next up, grab your application.py file, again from advancedpython.net. And so in your CS50 ID, click on New File, and then go ahead and save it. Activity 7, let's call this application.py. Alright, so alright, so now let's take a look at our function and route for friends. You'll notice it looks a little bit different than what we've worked with previously. So first off, in our function, we've got a variable that we're now passing in, and by default, the default value of our variable, we're going to set it to none. Okay, so here we're passing in a variable called name, and we're assigning it the value of none. Now you'll also notice that we have a variable that we're creating, and that's going within a bracket over here. So within the bracket there, we're adding a variable to our route friends. So again, your function is going to receive this variable name, in this case name, and that's our keyword argument. All right, so now you have to put both routes together, so they kind of work together. So one version of the route is just friends, kind of like what you've done before with routes, and the second version is where you're going to be passing in a variable. So in this case, we're going to pass in a variable called name. So for example, if we take a look at our file here, we have our route for friends, and then we declared our function called friends. And if the user puts in Sam, it's going to return Sam as my friend. So when you go ahead and you run Flask, you're going to see a message. So when I run Flask here, I get index.html, and now I'm going to put in our route for friends here, and let's see what happens. And so by default, what's happening here is that it's returning that message friends function default, which is over here. All right, so just to note, variables and values in Python are case sensitive, so just be careful with that. And actually, I forgot to write this code here. Let's go back into our CS50 IDE, and we're gonna add in here if name equal Sam. We're going to return name plus is my friend. And then we're going to go ahead and save it. All right, then we're going to go ahead and rerun our Flask here. And again, looking at our web page for friends, let's test out when we put in this variable called Sam here. Now you'll notice here, it returns the message Sam is my friend from this section of our friends function. All right, so again, note that variables and values in Python are case sensitive, so be careful about that. So for example, if you put friends with a capital F, you would get a not found from the web server. And also the same thing goes with Sam. It would recognize it if you put an uppercase S as well. So optionally, you can also convert to a specific file type. By default, it's a string. So if you wanted to convert the data type of the value that's kind of coming in, you would use that converter. So some converter types that you could convert to, again, by default, it's a string. You could also turn into an int or a float. And also there are two other options there, but we won't go into those. So for activity 7 part A, create a conditional statement that returns different messages or HTML files for each of your friends. In addition, link to these web pages from your index.html file. All right, more templates in Flask. So now that we've kind of worked a little bit with our templates, let's delve into it a little bit deeper. So in general, mixing business and presentation logic can lead to code that is hard to understand and maintain. Think about how we've originally worked with CSS, and we've kind of removed some of the presentation of how our web page looks like. We've kind of put that into a CSS file. So this is going to be a little bit different. So again, best practice, you want to separate the business logic from the presentation logic, and you want to move the presentation logic into the templates to help improve the maintainability of the application. So again, we've worked with templates before. A template is a file that contains the text of a response with a placeholder variables for the dynamic parts. That's how we're going to use Jinja, which is built into Flask. So the process that replaces the variables with actual values and returns a final response string is called rendering. And the task of rendering templates, Flask uses an engine called Jinja2. So again, we've used this before. Render template takes the file name of the template as its first argument. And now we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to add additional arguments that are going to be in a key value pair, and they represent actual values for variables that are referenced within your template. So for example here, let's look at our friends route. So again, we had our default /friends, and then we started to pass in our friends' names with that less than, and then variable name, in this case name, and then greater than. And to do this, I'm going to move my head over to the top here. You would say comma name equal name. So the name on the left hand side represents the argument name, and which is used in the placeholder written in the template. Now the name on the right hand side is the value of the argument. So name of variable on the left hand side, value on the right hand side. Generally speaking, you want to use the same variable name on both sides. It's not required, but it is considered best practice. Alright, so let's go ahead and create a friends.html file, save it to your templates directory. So let's go ahead and create our friends.html file, paste that in there, and we'll call this friends.html. We'll save this in our templates directory. And just to know for yourself, the variable name in between the two curly braces are used as template references and are considered a special placeholder. So let's look again at the code that we wrote for friends.html. So again, when you want to reference a variable, you have two curly brace opens and then two curly brace close. Alright, so Jinja also has variable filters. So for example, you could capitalize the value of the variable, you could lowercase it, uppercase it, title it, trim it. You could strip tags out of the values that come in, and you could also say save. So let's just look back very quickly about how this would work. Let's go back to our application.py file, and let's do something a little different here. Instead of Sam here, let's return our render template. So let's render our template, and we'll call it friends.html. And again, we'll say name equal name over here. Alright, so here, again, let's restart our Flask, and then let's refresh our page here. And you'll notice now it says Sam over here. Now we could also do this by default as well. So think about how you could make it say whichever friend's name you wanted. Think about how you could do that. Alright, so for part B, I want you to customize your webpage for your friends. Would you create different HTML files for your template, or would you create one template? Feel free to use another theme besides friends. You could do movies, you could do hobbies, you could do all sorts of things. And that's about it. I'll see you in the Google Meet.